Greetings to you today. It is Sunday, the 14th of March, 2021. 14th of March, a very special day in our home. Our middle daughter, Ashley, was born on this day. I'm not going to give you the year because that just wouldn't be fair. But Ashley, a very happy birthday to you, sweetheart. Today I would like us to think about the story in Joshua, and particularly Joshua chapter 1, where we're going to hear about God's instructions for difficult days ahead. Joshua chapter 1, beginning to read at verse 6, I think, and then down to verse 10, and then over to verse 16. Hear the word of the Lord. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give to them. Be strong and be very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law that my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let the book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything that's written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp, he said, and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. Then down to verse 16. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your words, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. The children of Israel were now on the east side of the river Jordan. They had crossed the Red Sea out of Egypt. They had come up through the Sinai Peninsula. Now they were on the eastern side of the river Jordan. Just a few more kilometers and they would be in sight or in the very presence of the great city of Jericho. But the Lord did something pretty strange here. And in that strange work of God, remember, what we consider strange is absolute wisdom and knowledge to God. We do not always know how he works and why he works. We just follow. Children of Israel said to Joshua, as long as you follow God the way Moses followed God, we're going to follow you. Just be strong and be courageous. So here we have the children of Israel and we have Joshua on the eastern side of the river Jordan. They needed to cross it. There were 3 things that actually happened in the life and experience of the children of Israel in that moment. There was a 3-day pause. The command came from God to wait for 3 days. You're here, but you're not quite ready. What did the pause mean? Well, 3 days is recognized in Scripture as the period that describes death and resurrection. Listen to the word. As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Speaking of Jesus. So it's appropriate, it's just right that this period of 3 days be used. Of course, the description of Jonah, Old Testament, and the description of the 3 days for Jesus, New Testament, there is a consistent thread. These 3 days, taking you from almost a death experience to a resurrected experience, taking you from the dismal experience of your slavery in Egypt and your journey in the Sinai, and now you're almost there. Now God is saying, you're there, but you're not ready. Have you ever had that experience where you're there, but you are not quite ready? And it wasn't because the Jordan River was so wild. It was at flood stage. It was at the highest volume of water that it ever is going to be throughout the year. It's at harvest time. There is a time here for us to recognize that this was no stream. This was no just little brook. It was flooding. It was roaring. And across the river stood Jericho. There was the promised land. You can almost smell it. You can almost taste it. We're almost there. And now we have to stand on the banks on the other side of the river and wait for 3 days. Why? Well, metaphorically speaking, we have some historical evidence that the same thing happened to Abraham. He waited on the wrong side, if you like, or the other side of Jordan before he could cross over and see the son that would be born through the promise of God. David was waiting for a long time on the other side of the river before he became king, even though it had been prophesied quite some time before. The sisters of Bethany, when their brother Lazarus had died, waited on the other side of the river Jordan for Jesus to come and perform that wonderful miracle. And so while at first glance it could be said that the pause was to wait until this river stopped raging for 3 days, and there would be no evidence that it would stop in 3 days, the deeper meaning is that sometimes in our lives, when we are there and ready to cross, we do need to pause. We do need to take stock. We do need to take our time. Many a saint has been brought to the same banks, figuratively, metaphorically speaking, and there's no bridge over it. There's no way to get across. There's no boat or ferry. And we just have to stay still right there on the other side of the Jordan. So, what did the pause mean? I think I've just explained it. How was the pause spent? This is very interesting. The pause, if you read into chapter 2, and I'm not going to do that, but I invite you to read Joshua chapter 2. In chapter 2, we begin to read of a very interesting person. Her name is Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute. She was a person you wouldn't expect to find in a biblical story of honor and merit, yet not only is she in this story, but she finds her way into the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. Rahab, during these days of pause, was waiting to receive spies that Joshua would send. So somebody was able to get across. Spies went across into the city of Jericho to just spy out the land, spy out the city. And God had been working in the life of Rahab. And Rahab, to make a long story short, protected and actually hid the spies, and she would let them down from her window to escape after they had been able to check out the land. This pause was spent to allow God the opportunity for those spies to go to Jericho, to meet with the most unexpected person that you could think, even though it was dangerous for them to be there and dangerous for her to do what she did. She did it. God used the most unlikely person to eventually bring the children of Israel into that promised land. But there was something else happening in the pause. Joshua was able to go through his own troops, his own ranks. They weren't really troops, they were the children of Israel. And he discovered that in these 3 days, there were some who had some doubts about taking the promised land. There were those who were ambivalent about what was coming next. They had traveled for a long time. Now they are at the banks, and now they've been told to wait. It is interesting that those who wanted to return to the lush pastures of Gilead and Bashan, those who wanted to go back at the very moment of seizing victory, were the eastern tribes that actually ended up not having much of a role to play in occupying the land. In fact, they were swept, those particular folk were swept into captivity from which they never returned. So the 3-day pause, how it was spent was that God was working in those 3 days to allow Rahab to enter the picture and the spies to check out Jericho, and to allow Joshua the opportunity to see who was for him and who was against him. So what did the pause mean? How was the pause spent? And finally, how did the pause end? Well, on the 3rd day, the host seemed to have come a little closer to the riverbank. God then gave the instruction to the people through the voice of Joshua. He said to the people, when you see the Ark of the Covenant, that is, when you see God, then you move out and follow the Ark. Because if you don't follow the Ark, you'll never know where you're going. That's a great reminder to each one of us that in these days of trying to cross the river Jordan, and we all have them, we've all stood at the bank on the other side of the river wondering when we'll ever get across. Here was the moment. Follow the Ark. Then the instruction was given that when those who were carrying the ark would come to the riverbank, they would actually go into the water and they would stand there. And God would do another tremendous miracle. And what he would do is he would stop the flow of the River Jordan a little further upstream. It actually, the chapter gives the name of the town where it would happen, to where the water stopped and piled up like a brick wall, meaning that now they were on dry land. It just seems like a Red Sea story all over again. In chapter 3, verse 17, we read these words. The priests who carried the ark and the covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Picture it with me. Now, it wasn't that they had stepped out ahead and that they were just even though the people of Israel were instructed to stay 1,000 yards behind the Ark of the Covenant. Once the Ark of the Covenant and those carrying it went into the middle of the river, they were passing by. They didn't go on ahead with the ark. They stood in the middle of the river until the entire nation had crossed over. Oh, what a tremendous picture that is. My granda Hamilton was a great man. He was a big, tall man, and he was heavily built, and he was just like a John Wayne to me. And my granda Hamilton was known as a lollipop man. If you are not from the United Kingdom or Northern Ireland, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but granda Hamilton was a lollipop man, otherwise known as a crossing guard. Back in those days, they had a white coat, they had almost like a policeman's helmet or cap on, dressed up to the nines. He would go down to the corner when we all would be going to school, and there at the intersection of Union Street and Russell Drive, he would go out into the middle of the road with his lollipop stick. We called it a lollipop stick. It was a long broom handle type with a round circle at the top. It said stop on that. And he would turn that towards the cars, and we would all cross. And I felt so proud. I would say to people, that's my granddad right there. Or I just called him Granda Hamilton. And I remember looking to him every morning on the way to school and every afternoon on the way back as he stood in the middle of the road and he led all the kids across the street. And he didn't move until the last one of us had put our foot on the footpath or the sidewalk. And then he would return to his station and the traffic would start again. You know, friends, the river is raging today. It's at high flood. And God is looking for people to do what he does. That is, he stands in the middle and he directs us across, and he's never going to leave us until we're all safely on the other side. When we trust in him, and we trust him for that. But he's also looking for people in these days to do the same. I invite you to find ways to just stand where the waters are raging, stand where people are afraid, stand where people are tempted to just give it all up and go back, and we can't possibly cross here. And it may be a Rahab, a person you would least expect to have faith to help us. But it may be a Christian who's just really weak and has tried it all and can't go on any longer. You just might need to stand in the middle of a road or a river or in a pandemic, in the middle of a crisis, and hold up the banner of Christ and wait until everybody gets across. Pastors do that. Sunday school teachers do that. Youth leaders do that. But if you don't have a position in the church, even if you don't go to church and you're listening to this today, I just say to you, be that person who will stand in the middle of the raging crisis and help people get to the other side. Ernest Shortliff in 1887 wrote a hymn that I've quoted to you before, but it just seems so appropriate today. Lead on, O King eternal. The day of March is come. Henceforth in fields of conquest, thy tents shall be our home. Through days of preparation, thy grace has made us strong. And now, O King eternal, we lift our battle song. Lead on, O King eternal, till sin's fierce war shall cease, and holiness shall whisper the sweet amen of peace. For not with swords loud clashing, nor rolling, stirring drums, with deeds of love and mercy, the heavenly kingdom comes. Do you hear this? Stop the protesting. Stop the anti-this and anti-that. Recognize, please, once and for all, it's not with the roll of stirring drums, but it's with deeds of love and mercy that the heavenly kingdom comes. Lead on, O King eternal. We follow not with fears, for gladness breaks like morning where'er thy face appears. Thy cross is lifted o'er us. We journey in its light. The crown awaits the conquest. Lead on, O God of might. God bless you. We'll see you next Sunday, Lord willing.